The greatest revolution a human being can undergo has nothing to do with the external landscape and everything to do with the internal architecture. Empires have crumbled, plagues have swept continents, generals have been betrayed on the battlefield, and yet certain men and women walked through those catastrophes with an iron composure that history still cannot fully explain. They did not achieve that composure by reordering the chaos outside. They achieved it by mastering the territory within. That is the marrow of Stoic philosophy, and that is the axis around which everything that follows will turn. Consider Marcus Aurelius. Not simply as a historical figure seated on a throne, but as a man crushed from every direction simultaneously. Barbarian forces pressing the northern frontier. A devastating plague hollowing out his army and his cities. Political treachery threading itself through his closest circles. And yet what survives of him, what 2,000 years have preserved, is not a record of rage or collapse. What survives is a private journal, never intended for public eyes, filled with unflinching patience, methodical discipline, and radical self-examination. Meditation speaks no language of revenge. It speaks the language of accountability. Marcus understood one singular truth with absolute clarity: the external world is ungovernable, and the internal world is the only sovereign territory available to any human being. That is the Stoic axis. Epictetus, born into bondage, his body broken by a cruel master who wrenched his leg until it snapped, rose to become one of antiquity's most formidable intellects. He did not accomplish this by escaping his circumstances. He accomplished it by refusing to surrender his mind to them. His declaration was precise and devastating: genuine freedom belongs only to those who have stopped demanding jurisdiction over what was never theirs to govern. 10 laws of self-mastery are about to be laid out in sequence. Stay through all of them, because the final law, the 10th, is the one Marcus Aurelius returned to during his most brutal hours. It is the law that forms the bedrock beneath all the others, the one that has outlasted every empire and every ideology that has attempted to replace it. Do not abandon this before that final revelation arrives. And before the sequence begins, an act of immediate psychological discipline is required. When a principle lands with physical weight, when a sentence strikes something deeper than the intellect, place the phrase "reclaim your sovereignty" in the comments below. That act is not trivial. It is the first movement of Stoic practice, a deliberate turning inward, a declaration that the seat of power has been located correctly. Now, sharpen the focus. The deeper the descent into these 10 laws, the more the peripheral noise will fall away. Turn the inner instrument toward what is genuinely worth measuring. The 10th law: surrender the illusion of command over what was never yours to command. At the close of each punishing day as the ruler of the known world, Marcus Aurelius did not catalogue his enemies or inventory his grievances. He sat with one foundational reminder: dominion belongs to the mind, not to external circumstance. Recognize this, and the ground beneath the feet becomes solid. Ignore it, and every surface becomes treacherous. Scan an ordinary human life and the evidence of this neglect is everywhere. Years consumed wishing other people were different. Hours incinerated in fury over outcomes that no amount of fury could have altered. Mental energy bled out through the endless replaying of events whose architecture was already fixed. Every human being has participated in this waste. The Stoics named it with clinical precision: suffering does not originate in events. It originates in the war waged against them. Epictetus drew the essential boundary. On one side, thoughts, chosen responses, deliberate actions, the character brought to each encounter. These belong to the practitioner completely. On the other side, the behavior of other people, the movements of fortune, the randomness of accident, the absolute certainty of death. These belong to no one. Confuse the two categories and misery is guaranteed. See the boundary with clarity, and freedom becomes structurally available regardless of circumstance. Modern life subjects this boundary to relentless pressure. Traffic builds and the pulse spikes, but the anger does not accelerate a single vehicle. Weather cancels the plan, but the shouting does not shift a single cloud. A trusted person betrays the relationship, and the pain is genuine, but the replaying of the betrayal does not reverse the choice that was already made. These are not events within the domain of command. The only territory that remains is the quality of the response. This is not passive resignation. Stoic acceptance is not the white flag of defeat. It is the strategic reallocation of finite energy. When the war against the uncontrollable is abandoned, all that dispersed energy consolidates. It flows back into the only domain where it can actually work: the shaping of reactions, the exercise of virtue, the maintenance of dignity under pressure. The paradox is brutal in its elegance. The moment the attempt to control everything is abandoned, the actual influence over one's life expands dramatically. Observe the person who holds composure during a genuine crisis. Everyone around that individual is fragmenting, volume rising, judgment collapsing. That person speaks steadily, thinks clearly, acts effectively. The composure is not the product of controlling the crisis. It is the product of refusing to be directed by it. Marcus Aurelius deployed this understanding daily. Pain arrives from outside only when the internal judgment about it is abandoned to distortion. Remove the distorted judgment, and the event loses its capacity to govern the interior. Picture what shifts when the demand that the world comply with personal preferences is dropped entirely. The tonnage lifts. In that lifting, something extraordinary occurs: the step into actual freedom. The storms that are coming are not consulting anyone's calendar. They will arrive and depart on their own schedule. The only genuine choice is whether to be submerged by resistance or to remain upright through acceptance. That acceptance is the foundation upon which all 10 laws rest. The 9th law: govern the inner response before it governs everything else. Seneca's observation is surgical: the suffering that imagination manufactures almost always exceeds the suffering that reality delivers. The Stoics understood that events arrive from outside, but the arena of genuine consequence is always interior. Every wound, every insult, every reversal of fortune carries a double nature: the raw fact of what happened, and then the meaning the mind assigns to it. That meaning is not given by the event. It is constructed afterward, in the half-second gap between stimulus and response. That gap is the entire territory of Stoic practice. Imagine a collision in a crowded ancient marketplace. A stranger jostles roughly past, wine spills across the cloak, the moment is disrupted. 2 paths open simultaneously. One escalates, the voice rises, the confrontation spreads, the rest of the day becomes contaminated. The other responds from a different register entirely: the accident is acknowledged, composure maintained, movement continues. The event was identical in both cases. The reaction determined everything. That same architecture applies to every modern equivalent: the aggressive driver, the dismissive colleague, the family conversation that ignites without warning. The incident occupies a fraction of the equation. The story constructed around it occupies everything else. Epictetus described the structure of a life as a theatrical performance in which the role is assigned but not the script. The other performers deliver lines that cannot be controlled. The length of the production is not negotiable. What remains entirely within province is the quality and integrity of the performance itself. When an insult arrives like a hostile line from another actor, it carries no inherent power to wound unless character is abandoned and purpose forgotten. Purpose is reason, virtue, composure. Mastery of response keeps the performance coherent regardless of how chaotic the stage becomes. The individuals drawing the deepest admiration in any community are rarely those who dominate through volume or force. They are the ones whose steadiness functions as a fixed point when everything around them becomes fluid. Their composure demonstrates something that sheer power never can, the strength to command themselves rather than others. Stoic mastery of response is emphatically not suppression. The ancient teachers were not advocates for emotional anesthesia. Anger surfaces. Fear arrives. Grief settles into the bones. These are not malfunctions. They are the legitimate textures of a human life. What the Stoic tradition refuses to permit is the automatic, unexamined translation of those states into destructive action. The interval between feeling and acting is where character is either built or dismantled. Marcus Aurelius encoded this discipline into daily practice. External conditions carry no inherent power to harm. The harm enters through the abdication of self-governance. A sharp, hostile communication arrives. The body registers the threat immediately, the heart rate climbs, the chest constricts, the vocabulary of retaliation assembles itself automatically. At that precise moment, two trajectories diverge. One fires immediately and the damage is permanent. The other withdraws, waits until the interior weather stabilizes, then responds from a position of clarity. The second path demonstrates mastery not over the sender but over the self. That mastery is simultaneously a form of protection and a declaration of freedom. No external force can conscript the spirit if the response is genuinely chosen. The insult can be delivered but not received. The possessions can be removed but not the capacity for detachment. The body can be constrained but not the will. This is why Epictetus, who experienced the most severe external bondage imaginable, was structurally freer than rulers who possessed every material advantage. Training this capacity begins with a single movement, catching the moment just before the automatic response fires. Not suppressing it. Catching it. Then discipline, reminding the mind what actually matters and what merely feels urgent. Then repetition. Each iteration of choosing steadiness over reactivity deepens the neural groove of mastery. Over sufficient repetition, it stops being a practice and becomes a nature. The ancient sources attest to this. Marcus Aurelius faced the coordinated collapse of armies, conspiracies within his own household, the death of his children. His written record shows a hand that held steady. He had trained the hand to hold. The world will construct its tests. The response is what defines the person subjected to those tests. The eighth law, align with reality rather than demanding reality align with personal preference. The Stoic imperative to live according to nature has been misread as a call toward primitivism. It is nothing of the sort. In a civilization of urban architecture, networked communication, and artificial illumination, the instruction points not outward toward ecology but inward toward the fundamental structure of what a human being actually is. To live according to nature is to stop imposing a fictional version of reality over the actual one. It is to understand clearly what kind of being a human being is, what role it occupies in the larger fabric of existence, and then to move through that existence in genuine alignment with reason, virtue, and the irreversible flow of natural process. Marcus Aurelius was never permitted to forget that imperial authority did not exempt him from mortality. He was a creature subject to deterioration, illness, and inevitable dissolution just like the slaves who served his table. He reminded himself constantly that he was a component of a vastly larger whole, that his existence served purposes extending well beyond personal gratification. His written observation that what harms the hive harms the bee was not political strategy. It was a cosmological understanding of where one individual stands in relation to everything else. Contemporary suffering is substantially manufactured by the refusal to accept nature's terms. The demand that existence remain unchallenging collides with nature's foundational commitment to complexity. The demand that other people remain consistently generous and fair collides with nature's production of an incalculable range of character types. The demand for permanence collides with nature's absolute mandate: everything transforms, everything ages, everything concludes. The image is ancient and remains exact: the swimmer who fights the current exhausts all available energy and makes no progress. The swimmer who reads the current accurately and aligns with it moves forward without consuming additional force. Illness, aging, professional setback, and grief are elements of the current. Resistance does not alter their trajectory. It only depletes the one resisting. Seneca articulated the mechanics with characteristic sharpness: destiny escorts the willing and drags the resistant. The difference between escorting and dragging is the entire quality of a life. Consider every instance of being dragged, the relationship extended far past its natural conclusion, the professional change resisted until it arrived without invitation, the attachment to a particular version of the body that time was always going to revise. The dragging was never caused by the circumstance itself. It was caused by the refusal to live according to the nature of things. But the instruction carries a second and deeper layer. Nature for the Stoics also meant the nature specific to human beings, their distinctive capacity for reason, their inescapable embeddedness in a social fabric, their unique ability to act from principle rather than from instinct. To betray this nature, to operate from cruelty, from selfishness, from willful ignorance, is to tear the interior apart. To honor this nature, to deploy reason, to practice justice, to exercise genuine courage and deliberate moderation, is to arrive at something that external acquisition can never produce: structural peace. The practical interrogation runs daily. Is reason directing the choices, or is impulsive appetite directing them? Is the conduct genuinely fair to the others who share the social space, or is it extractive? Is self-discipline genuinely exercised, or have desires been permitted to govern without contest? These questions are not abstract. They are the instruments by which a life can be continuously calibrated against its actual purpose. Consumer culture functions by convincing people that their fundamental inadequacy can be remedied by acquisition. The Stoics named this mechanism precisely. Accumulation, social rank, and sensory indulgence are external preferences, not genuine goods. They are unable to deliver what they promise because they point in the opposite direction from where actual fulfillment is located. The emptiness that persists in lives materially overstocked is not a mystery. It is the predictable consequence of searching in the wrong territory. Everything changes. Every season confirms this without argument: the burst of growth, the peak, the slow withdrawal, the stripping bare. Human existence obeys the same rhythm. Marcus Aurelius meditated regularly on his own disappearance, on the long procession of rulers who had preceded him into nothing. This was not morbid. It was clarifying. The compressed nature of a single life becomes, under that lens, an urgent invitation to inhabit each day with genuine intentionality. Aligning with nature means releasing the demand to be exempt from its terms. It means applying reason rather than impulse to each decision point. It means embracing transformation rather than erecting futile defenses against it. It means holding clearly the understanding that the obligation is not only to the self but to the larger fabric of which the self is one thread. The seventh law: treat every obstacle as a commission from the universe to develop a specific capacity. The Stoics did not petition the gods for an unobstructed road. They understood that the unobstructed road is precisely what produces the incapacity to navigate anything genuinely difficult. Difficulty was reframed not as punishment but as instruction, not as evidence of cosmic hostility but as the mechanism by which the interior becomes progressively more resilient. Marcus Aurelius crystallized this in a formulation that has outlasted every comfortable idea his contemporaries ever produced: the impediment activates the action. What blocks the path becomes the path itself. Imagine the reorientation required to actually inhabit that perspective. Instead of contracting before difficulty, expanding into it. Every instance of humiliation becomes practice in equanimity. Every loss becomes practice in the release of attachment. Every reversal becomes practice in the construction of genuine endurance. This is the operational meaning of treating adversity as commission. The soldier analogy holds: no training environment constructed from comfort produces a soldier capable of functioning under actual pressure. The capacity develops in direct proportion to the resistance encountered. Human character operates identically. The interior remains soft, untested, and brittle in the absence of genuine challenge. The Stoic tradition presents difficulty not as something to be avoided but as the primary raw material of psychological growth. Seneca's observation is still operating at full force: no gemstone achieves its surface without the friction that reveals it. No person achieves genuine depth without the trials that excavate it. Withdrawing from struggle is simultaneously withdrawing from the development that struggle alone produces. The specific difficulties that generate the most dread are frequently the ones that contain the most concentrated developmental potential. Retrospective examination of any life reveals the pattern with uncomfortable consistency. The moments that catalyze the deepest growth, that produced the clearest self-knowledge, that forged the most durable qualities, were almost never the comfortable ones. They were the failures, the ruptures, the forced confrontations with limits previously undiscovered. When people are invited to identify the turning points in their lives, the turning points are almost universally moments of pressure rather than moments of ease. Epictetus constructed a precise taxonomy. Pain arrives, it is raw material for the development of endurance. Injustice arrives, it is raw material for the development of justice in the response. Fear arrives, it is raw material for the development of courage. The world functions as a comprehensive training installation, and each difficulty it delivers is a precisely weighted resistance exercise for the soul. The contemporary trap is the addiction to frictionlessness. Every available technological and social resource is marshaled toward minimizing inconvenience. The consequence is a population that breaks under pressures that previous generations would have catalogued as manageable. Minor inconveniences register as catastrophes. Small setbacks trigger disproportionate collapses. The Stoic diagnosis is accurate: comfort systematically cultivated produces fragility systematically guaranteed. This does not mean constructing suffering artificially or pursuing pain for its own perverse sake. The Stoic teachers were not advocates of self-destruction. The instruction is about the orientation toward pain when it arrives, as it invariably will. The shift is from "why is this happening to me" to "what specific capacity is this asking me to develop?" The lighter burden is rejected in favor of the stronger back. Marcus Aurelius absorbed this orientation completely. He did not pretend that plague and warfare and betrayal were pleasant. He documented them with complete honesty. What his documentation also reveals is that each of those circumstances was approached as material for the continued exercise of his philosophical commitments. He recorded his failures and returned the next day to renewed practice. His words persist across 2,000 years because he actually inhabited them rather than merely articulating them. The transformation that becomes available through this law is not theoretical. It is structural. Difficulty, properly received, recalibrates the interior permanently. The person who emerges from genuine adversity with the Stoic orientation is not the same person who entered it. The storms that once capsized everything become navigable. Not because the storms diminish, but because the navigator has been forged into something capable of holding course through them. The sixth law, refuse to be governed by appetite. The architecture of perpetual dissatisfaction is elegant in its cruelty. The object of desire is acquired. Satisfaction flickers briefly into existence. The mind immediately identifies the next object. Satisfaction vanishes. The chase resumes. This is not a description of a broken system. This is the system operating precisely as desire, left unexamined, is designed to operate. Seneca named the mechanism without compromise. Poverty is not a condition of having too little. It is a condition of wanting more than what is present. The person with modest resources and a disciplined relationship to appetite is structurally wealthier than the person of enormous material surplus in the grip of perpetual craving. The law is not an instruction toward asceticism. The Stoic teachers were not cave-dwelling renunciants. They participated in the material world, accepted its gifts, and acknowledged the genuine pleasures that existence makes available. The operative distinction is between enjoying the gifts of existence and being enslaved by the demand for them. Ownership of desire rather than by desire. This is the territory. In the contemporary context, desire has been industrialized. Entire sectors of the economy are engineered around the systematic creation of artificial needs, the deliberate manufacturing of the sensation of deficiency where none actually exists. Every advertisement is a declaration that the present state is insufficient and that a specific acquisition will resolve the deficiency. The Stoic counter-declaration is blunt: the deficiency is manufactured, the acquisition will not resolve it, and the sensation of insufficiency will survive and intensify regardless of what is purchased. Epictetus prescribed a specific cognitive maneuver. When desire activates, pause before acting on it and note clearly that the object of desire exists outside the complete jurisdiction of the one desiring it. It may arrive or it may not. If the quality of life is made contingent on its arrival, then the quality of life has been handed over to fortune. The alternative, pursue it with genuine effort, receive it with genuine pleasure if it arrives, and maintain structural equanimity if it does not. This is not emotional flatness. It is the architecture of actual freedom. The discipline also requires the cultivation of active recognition of existing abundance. What is already present, the capacity to reason, to choose, to act with integrity, to experience genuine connection, to witness the extraordinary complexity of a single ordinary day. Seneca urged his students into this recognition with characteristic intensity. Desire loses its compulsive grip when the practice of genuine appreciation for what already exists is maintained consistently. Marcus Aurelius inhabited this discipline under conditions that would have tested virtually anyone's commitment to it. He had access to resources of a scale that no other human being on the planet could approximate. He chose simplicity. He documented his suspicion of luxury, his recognition that excess distracts from virtue, his clear-eyed understanding that no level of material acquisition produces the equanimity that only character can produce. What he valued could not be taken. What he accumulated served its purpose and was held without clinging. The distinction the Stoics drew between purposeful aspiration and compulsive craving is essential. Aspiration shaped by reason and directed toward genuine contribution is not only permissible but actively encouraged. The Stoic tradition has no quarrel with ambition calibrated toward genuine value. It has a very specific quarrel with the craving driven by appetite without rationale, desire without direction, wanting without wisdom. Detachment prepares the ground for loss. Everything held will eventually be relinquished. Wealth shifts. Health declines. Relationships conclude. The clinging to any of these as permanent invites specific devastation when the inevitable transformation occurs. The practice of detachment does not diminish the depth of engagement with what is present. It deepens it, because the engagement is no longer contaminated by the anxiety of potential loss. The thing is enjoyed fully in its season. When the season ends, it is released cleanly. Epictetus offered the precise instruction, hold every beloved thing with the awareness that its nature is impermanence. This is not coldness. It is the most honest and therefore the most complete form of love and appreciation available. To enjoy without clinging, to be present without requiring permanence, to love without demanding that the loved thing remain beyond its natural conclusion. The freedom available through this law is specific and verifiable. The torment of unsatisfied craving dissolves. The corrosive operation of envy, which is the suffering generated by someone else's possession of something desired, loses its fuel. The simplest textures of existence, a meal prepared with care, an honest exchange with another person, the particular quality of light at a specific hour, become genuinely sufficient rather than merely acceptable placeholders for something better. This is what the Stoics called wealth that cannot be confiscated. The fifth law, deliberately choose difficulty in measured doses before difficulty chooses you without measure. Genuine strength, the kind that holds under actual pressure, is not produced by comfort. Every practitioner of Stoic philosophy understood this. What the most sophisticated among them also understood is that waiting for life to impose its tests is an inferior strategy to proactively and voluntarily seeking calibrated exposure to discomfort. Seneca practiced this with systematic regularity. He would exchange his usual quality of clothing for rough fabric. He would reduce his diet to basic provisions. He would strip the ambient luxury from his environment deliberately and then observe the quality of his interior response. The question he put to himself in those periods was pointed: is this the condition that once generated terror? The answer, reliably, was no. And the discovery that the answer was no reduced the power of that terror permanently. The contemporary skepticism toward this practice is understandable. The entire architecture of modern comfort is constructed around the project of eliminating friction. Temperature is regulated. Convenience is optimized. Every biological discomfort is addressed by a product specifically engineered to eliminate it. The consequence of this systematic elimination of friction is a population for whom the smallest deviation from optimal comfort registers as a genuine crisis. A network disruption generates fury calibrated to a genuine catastrophe. A travel delay produces a psychological response that previous generations would have reserved for actual emergencies. Voluntary discomfort reverses this dynamic at the structural level. A night on a hard surface demonstrates that adequate rest is achievable without the engineered luxury of a premium mattress. A deliberate period without a meal demonstrates that hunger, while genuinely unpleasant, is survivable and does not constitute the emergency the body insists it does. A cold shower, taken deliberately and without complaint, demonstrates that the body's capacity for discomfort substantially exceeds what comfortable living permits it to discover. Each of these small exercises communicates the same message to the interior: the circumstances can degrade significantly below current conditions and full functionality will be maintained. That communication is transformative. It dismantles the specific anxiety generated by the possibility of losing what is currently comfortable. When voluntary practice of deprivation has already demonstrated that deprivation is survivable, the threat of deprivation loses its capacity to generate paralysis. If one already knows, from direct embodied experience, what it is like to go without, then fortune's capacity to terrorize through the prospect of loss is dramatically curtailed. What remains of poverty's terror after it has been voluntarily rehearsed? What remains of hardship's threat after hardship has been intentionally inhabited? Seneca described the practice explicitly, designates certain periods for the conscious choice of minimal provision, uncomfortable conditions, and basic necessity. Then notice, the feared condition, when actually inhabited, is not the catastrophe that imagination had constructed. This is not a mandate for permanent self-punishment. It is a calibration exercise, performed periodically, that permanently recalibrates the relationship between comfort and identity. The gratitude dimension of this practice is significant. When comfort is returned to after a deliberate period of its absence, it is received with an intensity that habitual comfort never generates. The ordinary meal, eaten without deprivation, carries little particular weight. The same meal, eaten after a day of voluntary fasting, is experienced with a depth of appreciation that no luxury can replicate. Voluntary discomfort functions as a reset mechanism for genuine appreciation of what is ordinarily taken for granted. When genuine adversity arrives, as it will arrive without consulting anyone's preferences or scheduling accommodations, the person who has practiced voluntary discomfort meets it from a fundamentally different position than the person who has not. The former has embodied evidence of their own resilience. The latter faces the unknown with only untested assumption. The fourth law, treat time as the one currency that cannot be replenished and spend accordingly. Every other resource that can be lost can potentially be recovered. Money flows out and can flow back. Physical objects are lost and can be replaced. But every hour that passes does so permanently and without any mechanism for retrieval. The Stoics grasped this with a clarity that their contemporaries largely failed to match, and that most of the contemporary world continues to resist. Seneca's assessment of the situation is among the most bracing observations in the philosophical literature. The problem is not that the allotment of time is insufficient. The problem is that the majority of the allotment is surrendered to activities that return nothing of permanent value. Time itself is not the enemy. The unconscious, unconsidered hemorrhaging of time is the enemy. Examine an ordinary day with honest attention. How many hours are contributed to the passive consumption of content that generates no particular insight and leaves no particular trace? How many hours are spent in arguments about matters that will be irrelevant within the month? How many hours are consumed by the monitoring of information that cannot be acted upon? The arithmetic, applied honestly, can be alarming. Marcus Aurelius held himself to a specific and demanding standard regarding the use of his attention. His written instruction to himself was stark: departure from life is possible at any moment. Let that fact govern what is done, said, and thought. This is not morbidity. It is the sharpening agent that attention most requires. The awareness that the present moment is genuinely irreplaceable focuses the mind on what it would actually choose to do with irreplaceable things. Guarding time means developing the habit of applying a specific test before committing any significant portion of it. Does this align with what is genuinely valued? Does it serve genuine purpose? Does it move something meaningful forward? The capacity to answer no when the test fails, and to actually decline, is not a form of selfishness. It is a form of integrity. Every affirmation of something trivial is simultaneously a refusal of something significant. The mathematics are simple and brutal. Seneca observed the peculiarity with characteristic sharpness: a person whose money is stolen experiences genuine outrage. That same person, when their hours and years are consumed without their conscious participation, accepts the loss without protest. The greatest theft in most human lives is accomplished not by external agents but by the undirected drift of attention toward whatever ambient stimulation happens to present itself. The contemporary context intensifies the urgency. The attention economy is a genuine economic category. Significant intellectual and financial resources are deployed toward the capture and retention of human attention, because captured attention is a monetizable asset. The competition for the hours available in each day is sophisticated, well-funded, and operating continuously. Without active, deliberate countermeasures, those hours will be allocated by systems whose interests are not aligned with genuine human flourishing. Guarding time is not about manufacturing a rigid and joyless schedule. It is about the development of deliberate selectivity. What kinds of engagement actually nourish? What kinds of relationships actually develop the character? What kinds of work actually contribute something beyond its own perpetuation? What forms of rest actually restore the capacity for sustained engagement? These are the categories worth investing in, with the same serious attention applied to financial capital. The contemplation of mortality that the Stoics consistently practiced is not separate from this law, it is the engine that powers it. When the finite nature of the available time is genuinely held in awareness, the allocation of that time sharpens automatically. The postponement of essential living, the habit of deferring to some indefinitely scheduled future moment, loses its grip when the present moment is recognized as the only reliable unit of time available. Seneca's prescription, inhabit each day as if it were structurally complete in itself, so that whenever the conclusion arrives, it arrives to find nothing genuinely important left undone. Not because everything has been accomplished by some external measure, but because the time available has been genuinely used in accordance with actual values rather than ambient distraction. The third law, position the mind as the sovereign gatekeeper of every thought that seeks admission. Epictetus identified the law that governs the quality of every human life with a simplicity that is almost offensive in its directness. Not the event, but the relationship to the event, determines its power over the person it happens to. At the center of this relationship is the discipline of thought governance. The Stoic diagnosis of human suffering is precise. Most suffering is not the product of actual circumstances but of the narratives constructed around actual circumstances. Something genuinely difficult happens. The mind then immediately generates a story about what that event means, what it implies about the future, what it reveals about the fairness of existence. That story, rather than the event itself, becomes the primary source of suffering. The event is often unalterable. The story is always revisable. Daily existence subjects the mind to a continuous barrage of impressions demanding judgment. The cutting remark from a stranger. The rejected proposal at work. The disruption of a carefully planned sequence of events. The mind responds automatically, instantly generating interpretations that amplify the difficulty. This is unjust, this is catastrophic, this invalidates everything. Those interpretations are not responses to the event. They are responses to the narrative, and the narrative was constructed in a fraction of a second without deliberate examination. Marcus Aurelius framed the corrective in terms that locate the power precisely where it actually resides. The mind is accessible to its owner in a way that external events are not. The capacity to judge is owned completely. No one can install a particular judgment without the consent of the one being judged. Recognizing this clearly restores something that feels, paradoxically, like power returned from an external source. The image of the sentinel at the city gate is exact. The function of the sentinel is not to grant entry to every person who presents themselves. The function is to examine, to assess, and to admit only those whose presence serves the community. Applying this function to the incoming stream of impressions, fears, provocations, and temptations that arrive daily is the core practice of thought governance. Each impression is examined before it is granted residence. Is it accurate? Is it serving genuine purpose? Does it merit the interior real estate it is requesting? If not, it is turned away at the gate. Seneca diagnosed unexamined thought as an interior enemy more dangerous than any external adversary. Unexamined fear conjures catastrophes that statistical probability would never produce. Unexamined anger transforms accidents into deliberate affronts. Unexamined envy distorts the genuine quality of other lives into an indictment of one's own. These are not reasonable responses to actual conditions. They are the outputs of a mind that has been permitted to operate without governance. The contemporary information environment makes this discipline both more necessary and more difficult. The volume of incoming impressions has no historical precedent. Every attention capture mechanism in the environment is optimized for the activation of emotional response rather than the cultivation of measured thought. A single piece of content, absorbed without examination, can restructure the emotional weather of an entire day. The mechanism is not deliberate manipulation of any individual. It is the aggregate consequence of a system optimized for engagement rather than equanimity. The invitation issued here is specific: when a principle in this sequence lands with genuine force, place sovereignty of mind in the comments. That act is not ceremonial. It is the physical enactment of the principle being described. It is the deliberate interruption of passive reception and the substitution of active engagement. It is, in miniature, the practice itself. Thought governance does not require the pretense that difficulty is not difficult. The Stoics were empiricists. They acknowledged pain clearly and without theatrical performance. What they refused was the addition of unnecessary elaboration. Pain arrives, it is acknowledged without the appended narrative that it should not have arrived, that its arrival means the system is fundamentally broken, that its presence makes continuation impossible. The event is adequate material. The additional catastrophizing is not only unnecessary but is itself the primary source of amplified suffering. Marcus Aurelius returned to this discipline repeatedly in his private writing. External conditions carry their own weight. That weight does not need to be doubled by the additional judgment that the conditions are fundamentally unjust or that their existence represents a personal verdict on the one experiencing them. Remove the judgment, and the weight returns to its actual measure. The actual measure is almost always more manageable than the inflated version that narrative amplification produces. The second law: withdraw every atom of investment from what genuinely cannot be governed and redirect it entirely toward what genuinely can. The foundational classification that Epictetus opened his essential manual with was not selected arbitrarily. He recognized it as the single distinction upon which every other element of a well-constructed life depends. Two categories of existence: that which falls within genuine jurisdiction, and that which does not. The entire architecture of human misery can be traced to the consistent failure to maintain this distinction with any clarity. What belongs within jurisdiction, the quality of attention applied to each moment, the honesty brought to each exchange, the deliberateness exercised in each choice, the commitment to virtue expressed in each action. These are owned completely and without qualification. No tyrant, no catastrophe, no reversal of fortune can reach them without explicit permission. Epictetus inhabited this reality even when his body was the legal property of another human being. His physical existence was constrained. His will was structurally untouchable. What exists outside jurisdiction, the responses of other people, the distributions of fortune, the movements of circumstance, the universal arc toward entropy and dissolution. Anger directed at these things is not a signal of strength. It is a signal of confusion about the actual structure of existence. The daily accounting of how much energy bleeds into the unjurisdictional category can be genuinely shocking. Anxiety about perceptions held by people whose opinions are ultimately irrelevant. Fury at weather systems that do not register the objection. Despair about the passage of time that not even the most concentrated effort can decelerate by a single second. All of this represents the comprehensive misdirection of finite resources toward territory where they can produce no return whatsoever. While this misdirection is occurring, the territory that is actually available, the actual interior domain where genuine development is possible, is being systematically neglected. This is the Stoic indictment of ordinary psychological life, not that it is dramatic or dissolute, but that it is pointed in precisely the wrong direction. Marcus Aurelius arrived at the insight that it is not the reordering of the world that produces peace. It is the reordering of the relationship to the world. Change the mind and peace is immediately available. Wait for the world to change first and peace is structurally impossible, because the world in its complexity will never achieve a configuration that permanently satisfies any particular set of preferences. The arrow metaphor encodes the entire teaching in a compact image. The archer's genuine domain of responsibility, the preparation of the equipment, the steadiness of the hand, the care of the aim. Everything after the arrow is released, the behavior of the wind, the potential movement of the target, the material integrity of the arrow in flight. None of that falls within jurisdiction. The archer who ties in a piece to the arrow's outcome is in permanent psychological jeopardy. The archer who ties in a piece to the quality of the aim is structurally secure regardless of where the arrow lands. The same distinction applies to every act of genuine effort in every domain of life. The Stoic instruction is not passivity. It does not suggest indifference to outcomes or withdrawal from engagement with the world. It suggests a precise calibration of where investment is placed. Bring the fullest possible attention to what is actually within jurisdiction. Execute with genuine care and authentic effort. Then release the outcome with complete equanimity. The release is not defeat. It is the recognition that the arrow has been loosed, that the rest belongs to the wind. Seneca's observation closes this section with precise impact. Suffering that anticipates events that have not yet occurred, and may never occur, is a form of multiplication of misery that the mind inflicts on itself without any external assistance. The Stoic prescription: release the unjurisdictional. Not because it does not matter, but because the energy spent on it produces nothing and depletes everything. Place that energy into the jurisdiction that is actually owned. The practice of asking, does this fall within my actual domain of authority before investing energy in it can, over sustained application, restructure the entire quality of a life. The first law: place character above every other value, without exception and without negotiation. At the center of every other Stoic teaching, the single principle upon which all 10 of these laws ultimately rest, virtue is the only genuine good. Every other category of value, material accumulation, physical health, pleasure experienced, social position attained, these are what the Stoic philosophers classified as preferred indifference. They may be preferred, but they are not good in themselves. The quality that defines a life is not what it accumulates or achieves by external measure. It is how it is actually lived, with what degree of wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation. Marcus Aurelius, commanding an empire of a scale that no other human being of his era could match, reduced his entire evaluative framework to a single instruction: do what is right. The rest of the equation, the glory, the recognition, the historical record, all of it becomes irrelevant beside that instruction. An emperor, surrounded by every incentive to compromise in exchange for advantage, choosing simplicity as the supreme standard. Do the right thing. Everything else is secondary noise. Seneca offered the structural logic: a character firmly established resists displacement. Virtue is the anchor whose holding power is not diminished by the intensity of the storm. Without it, every external acquisition is merely ballast that shifts with the weather. With it, the vessel holds its position regardless of what the weather delivers. The 4 cardinal virtues of Stoic practice are not abstract aspirations. They are daily operational standards against which each choice is measured. Wisdom: the commitment to see the actual structure of situations without distortion, to apply reason rather than rationalization, to make choices that are actually calibrated to genuine reality rather than to preferred fictions. Justice: the maintenance of fair dealing in every relationship, the recognition that every other human being shares the same fundamental nature and deserves the same basic respect, the refusal to extract benefit through the diminishment of others. Courage: the capacity to move toward what is necessary despite the presence of fear, to maintain position under pressure, to choose the difficult right thing over the comfortable wrong one. Temperance, the governance of appetite in every domain, the practice of measured engagement rather than excess, the refusal to be driven by compulsive craving in any direction. These four standards applied daily, in every decision point, shape the character. The character, accumulated over time, shapes the destiny. Not the destiny constructed by external circumstances, but the genuine destiny that consists of the quality of the interior life, the depth of the equanimity available, the dignity maintained under whatever conditions existence delivers. The freedom that virtue produces is of a specific and robust kind. When pleasure and wealth are positioned as primary values, their absence generates genuine suffering. When virtue is positioned as the primary value, fortune loses its capacity to inflict structural damage. Everything external can be stripped away. The capacity for honest dealing cannot be taken. The choice of courage in the face of fear cannot be taken. The application of reason to difficulty cannot be taken. These are located in territory that is genuinely sovereign. Observe the actual texture of lives constructed around external achievement without internal calibration. The accumulation does not resolve the restlessness. The status does not generate the peace it promised. The recognition does not address the underlying absence of genuine purpose. The Stoic explanation is not moral condemnation. It is structural analysis. The search is being conducted in the wrong category of existence. Genuine fulfillment is located in character, and character is the one investment that consistently returns exactly what was invested. Marcus Aurelius, facing the full range of what human existence can impose, declined to compromise the commitment. His private written instruction to himself, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. The simplicity of the standard and the consistency of its application across decades of governing one of history's most complex political entities is the evidence for its operational validity. The daily practice this law demands is straightforward. Before each significant choice, apply the fourfold test. Does this reflect wisdom? Does this reflect justice? Does this reflect courage? Does this reflect temperance? If yes to all, proceed. If not, revise. Over accumulated time, this practice builds a character whose resilience is not contingent on favorable external conditions. That is the Stoic promise, and it is the promise that every life examined in this sequence actually kept. 10 laws. Now their sequence can be seen in its architectural clarity. The 10th law established the foundation: stop requiring the world to comply with personal preferences, and recover the energy wasted on that requirement. The 9th refined the practice: the response to what happens is more consequential than what happens itself. The 8th provided the cosmological context: align with the actual nature of things rather than constructing an alternative reality through resistance. The 7th transformed the texture of difficulty: every obstacle is a commission for the development of a specific capacity. The 6th addressed the engine of perpetual dissatisfaction: master desire so that it serves life rather than consuming it. The 5th built the physical infrastructure of resilience: deliberately choose calibrated discomfort before life imposes it without calibration. The 4th secured the most irreplaceable resource: protect time with the same seriousness applied to any other finite and non-renewable asset. The 3rd established interior sovereignty: govern the thoughts that are permitted to take residence in the mind. The 2nd isolated the domain of genuine authority: invest exclusively in what is actually within jurisdiction. And the 1st placed the capstone: make virtue the unconditional standard, the one thing that no external force can touch. Together these are not philosophical entertainment. They are operational equipment for a life that does not depend on favorable circumstances in order to be genuinely good. The contemplation that closes this: what kind of person is worth being remembered as? Not by the legacy of accumulated objects. not by the positions held or the recognition received. By the quality of character deployed in each ordinary moment when no one was watching and the choice still mattered. The answer to that question is built not in a single dramatic gesture but in a patient accumulation of small, daily, consistent choices made in the direction of wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation. That building has already begun. It is built choice by choice, thought by thought, response by response, one deliberate decision at a time. When the internal territory is genuinely governed, the external landscape arranges itself accordingly. Not because fortune bends to the disciplined will, but because the disciplined will no longer requires fortune's cooperation to remain upright. That is the law. That is the path. That is the permanent invitation.